Hey there, Mike Robbins here, coming to you live for the first time in a few weeks. It's a little before 2 p.m. on the 25th of May as I'm doing this. So if you're joining live on Facebook or on LinkedIn or even on YouTube, feel free to chime in with a comment. Let me know how you're doing, where you are, what's going on. If you're watching the video of this after the fact, you can chime in and leave a comment as well. I will come back and take a look and try to respond. So today I want to talk about mental health. There's a number of reasons why this is important, but yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. We've been dealing with someone close to us who's been struggling with a mental health crisis for a few months now. And so many of our friends, hey, Andre, I hope things are good in New Zealand. So many of our friends have been dealing with mental health challenges with especially their teens and their kids. But so many people that I know and that I'm talking to, we're talking a lot more about mental health. I mean, a number of the companies that we partner with, when I talk to their CEOs or senior leaders or executives, are just wanting to, how do we support our managers in caring for themselves mentally and emotionally? And then how do we support our teams and our team members? Because it's a real crisis right now in our country, in our world. I mean, here we are, it's late May. Many of us are fortunate enough to live in a place like the United States or New Zealand, Andrea, or other places where either like in New Zealand and Australia, where COVID was handled in such a way that life didn't really shut down too much. Here in the US, obviously, it wasn't handled well at all. And it got really, really bad for quite a long time, but we're fortunate and privileged enough to have so much access to the vaccine now that things are getting much better. I mean, my heart goes out to everyone in India and Brazil and other places where COVID is just raging right now and super intense, as well as places like Israel and Colombia where there's violence and other things happening. There are a lot of places here in the US and certain communities where there's a lot of violence. So thinking about everything that we've been through over the last 14, going on 15 months. And it's weird because on the one hand, I've been feeling a sense of hopefulness, a sense of optimism as, we're moving through this to some degree. Things are opening up, and restaurants and theaters and sporting venues, and it just feels like life is starting to come back to normal. And I say that in air quotes, whatever normal is. But again, that's here where I live in Marin County in the Bay Area in California. And it's different in different places. But even with that, I have been noticing that so many people I've been talking to, both personally and in my work, are really struggling. A lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of just difficulty mentally, emotionally, socially, which is interesting because like 6 months ago, circumstantially, we were just getting done with our election, our presidential election here in the US, which had been so contentious. And then there was all kinds of drama and shenanigans going on after the fact about the results. And then, the virus was spiking and we were getting into the winter time and the holidays, and everything just seemed, there was a lot of doom and a lot of gloom, and it was really hard. And even with the calendar changing to the new year, we had violence and an attempted whatever that was on January 6th at the Capitol that was so awful and scary. And, there were so many things that were so bad circumstantially. And here we are at the end of May. And again, there are still a lot of really intense things going on in the country and especially in the world. But there are so many things that are better. And yet at the same time, I think about my own experience, and I think about so many people that I know and talk to, and it seems like the stress, the anxiety, the trauma is really starting to set in of what we've experienced. And again, I've said this a lot throughout COVID. It's like same storm, different boats. We're not all experiencing the same thing. We're all experiencing COVID and other things that have been national or international, impacts, but people are experiencing it very differently. And I watched over the weekend the first episode of Oprah and Prince Harry's special on Apple TV. I think it's called The Me You Can't See. And I've been listening to some interviews that both of them have been doing around Oprah's new book, which I believe is called What Happened to You. And she wrote that book with Dr. Bruce Perry. It's conversations on trauma, resilience, and healing. And then she and Prince Harry have this series where they're really focusing on mental health. And both of them talk about some of their own trauma. Oprah being abused as a child, Prince Harry obviously losing his mother so tragically when he was 12 years old. And even coming from the ultimate privilege, Prince Harry, part of the royal family, and Oprah coming from not privileged at all, even though now she's one of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world, realizing that trauma is something that many of us as human beings experience. And ultimately, whether we experience an enormous amount of trauma or not, managing our mental health, managing our emotional health and well-being is as important, if not more important, than our physical health and well-being. But there's a lot of stigma about it. There's a lot of fear and shame and embarrassment about it. I talked about this earlier today on my podcast, but I grew up where mental health and mental illness had a huge impact on my life and our family. My dad suffered from pretty severe bipolar disorder. He and my mom split up when I was 3. And a big part of my life, a big reason why their marriage failed, and ultimately why my dad really struggled in his life, was due to his mental illness. And by the time I was about 6 or 7, my dad had lost his job and gotten really depressed and spent about 5 or 6 years from the age of 7 until I was about 13 in and out of hospitals and mental institutions and halfway houses and in communication, out of communication, on his meds, not on his meds. And it was just incredibly traumatic for me as a child. And my mom, single mom, raising 2 kids without much money or support from my dad financially or otherwise, like, I didn't totally understand what manic depression, as they called bipolar disorder in those days, was, but I knew that my dad wasn't well, but he wasn't sick with like cancer or some physical illness. He was sick with some mental illness. And again, while I didn't understand it, I knew that it was bad. I knew that there was something sort of secretive and like there was shame around it. And I could feel that as a kid. And as my dad actually moved through some of that really crisis experience that he had over those years, and I was a teenager and he was coming back into my life and into our lives, and he was getting himself supported more. And I just remember having a lot of conversations with him at that time. And this was the 80s, where we've made a lot of progress since then. I feel my father passed away almost 20 years ago, but my dad was first diagnosed with depression, manic depression, when he was in college at like 19, 20 years old. And, this was in the 50s. My dad was born in 1933. So it was like early 50s. And they sent him to a mental institution, gave him tranquilizers, which was the only medication at the time, just to kind of numb him out. He had electroshock therapy. And he struggled for most of his life without a lot of really effective ways for either him to be treated or for him to really embrace what was necessary for him to embrace, to work on some of what was going on for him mentally, emotionally. When I was in college, I got severely depressed myself, which was incredibly scary and painful and difficult. If you've ever been clinically depressed or been around someone who's clinically depressed, it's no joke. If you've never experienced it, it seems like, oh, just get over it, or, oh, just cheer up, or, oh, just meditate or exercise, or, and look, there are techniques that can help us, but clinical depression is no joke. And when I got depressed the first time, I was so impacted by the pain and the fear of it, but also there was an added piece for me, which was, oh no, I'm screwed. Basically, this is going to be my life. I'm going to be like my dad. I'm going to be like so many people in my family who've struggled with mental health issues and ultimately with severe mental illness. Thankfully, I got some help. I went and saw a psychiatrist at the Student Health Center at Stanford. Started taking Prozac, which was incredibly helpful and life-saving for me at that time. Found a counselor sort of outside of the system, a non-traditional counselor who started teaching me things about meditation and metaphysics and mind-body connection. And I started reading and I started meditating and I started learning. And it was life-changing for me as I look back on it now in a really positive way, but it was incredibly scary. And I didn't really talk about it with my teammates or my classmates or very many of my friends. Cause I mean, I was 20, 21 years old and a junior in college and a college baseball player who wanted to play professionally. And I just thought, I can't be mentally ill. That's not acceptable. And over the next 4 or 5 years of my life, I went in and out of some depressions, went off and then back on Prozac another time. And then eventually by my mid-20s, after my baseball career ended, I was fortunate enough to start taking some transformational and personal growth workshops and courses and intensives that opened and expanded my mind and my awareness to realize, like, in addition to traditional routes of psychiatry and psychology and medication, and as important as those are, there's also a lot of other modalities, and especially now, even more so than there were back in, the late 90s, that I could grow and I could heal and I could change and I could really tend to my mental and emotional well-being, as I have in an ongoing way. And thankfully for me, I haven't gotten stuck or really suffered from depression or anxiety or any specific mental illness over the last 20 plus years. But I would say this, that I definitely proactively focus on and manage my mental health, my emotional well-being a lot, and sometimes more than others. And I say all of this because just in this last week, I had a couple of what I now know were anxiety attacks, which were super scary. And while I've dealt with anxiety and fear, like most of us humans over the course of my life, and feel like I can navigate it and work through it, it was really scary. And I actually had to reach out for some help and talk to some experts and people, like, what's going on? I thought it was something happening to me physically. I got a bunch of tests and we're pretty sure what it was just anxiety, pretty high level, intense sort of clinical anxiety. And it gave me a different perspective and a deeper appreciation for people who deal with intense levels of anxiety as well as depression. It reminded me in a humble and vulnerable way of my experiences with depression in my 20s. And I just wanted to talk about it here today because I think a lot of us are struggling right now with fear, with loneliness, with trauma, with anxiety, with depression. Like, this has been a really hard time for a lot of us for a lot of different reasons. And I say that as someone who's incredibly privileged and blessed, who has access to technology, can still do my work, even though it's been disrupted and altered, and, has been safe from COVID. No one in my immediate family has gotten COVID, has been able to navigate this whole situation in so many ways. And this has been really hard. And I think of so many people here in our country and around the world who've dealt with significant trauma in their lives, who've dealt with significant trauma just over the course of the pandemic, getting sick, losing someone close, losing jobs or business opportunities, or having to close a business down. I think of all my friends, my brothers and sisters in the Black community who, today is the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And all of the violence that we've seen over the last number of months, over this last year, as well as the years and years and generations of violence, and the impact that has, whether that violence has been perpetrated specifically on someone individually or someone close to them, or just seeing images of that. And as upsetting and appalling as seeing the murder of George Floyd was to me, and the millions and millions, if not billions, of people around the world who saw that, and thinking of George's family, but also other people, other Black people here in America who look at George Floyd and see themselves in a very specific way. The trauma of that, the pain of that, the fear, the anger, all of that. I think of all the different experiences. Again, I think of our brothers and sisters right now in India and in Brazil dealing with COVID outbreaks that are intense, and a lack of access to vaccines, or our brothers and sisters in Israel or in Colombia where there's violence, and other places in the world, and even here in our own country. So I say all of that to say we're not all dealing with the same set of circumstances, but we're all dealing with this larger storm that we've been through and continue to find ourselves navigating through. And it's been difficult, it's been painful, it's been challenging. And just like if we had gone through something physically, like you get COVID, or you get the flu, or you break your leg or your ankle, or, there's a healing period acutely, and then there's the aftermath and the kind of getting back to whatever normal is. And we give ourselves hopefully some time and some space, and we get some support to do that. I think we have to do that mentally, emotionally. And the challenge with mental health challenges, mental illness, with trauma, with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, schizophrenia, a lot of those things, unless they're super intense and acute, people don't know. I heard Anderson Cooper in this beautiful interview he did with Stephen Colbert, conversation. They were talking about grief. And Anderson lost his brother when he was very young. And more recently, his mom passed away. And Stephen Colbert, his dad and two of his brothers died in a plane crash when he was quite young. And they were talking about loss and grief. And Anderson said something really moving to me, that he said, I wish when we're grieving, we could like wear a cast or have some kind of physical symbol or representation that we're grieving, so people could ask us about it and talk to us about it and tend to us and interact with us as though we're in a very vulnerable state, because we are. But the world doesn't know that or doesn't see that. When you're feeling scared or sad or lonely or isolated, when I'm feeling those things, or we're feeling depressed or anxious, or most of us have gotten really good at pretending like we're fine, because that's what the world wants and needs from us, just to be fine. But the truth is, most of us aren't fine ever, and especially these days. So it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be struggling. It's okay to ask for help. It's also okay for us to prioritize our mental and emotional well-being, especially right now. Because I've been saying this jokingly, but seriously, like, I don't think anyone's playing with a full deck mentally and emotionally these days. This has been more than we're used to handling. And while we're incredibly strong and resilient as humans, we're also fragile and vulnerable. So I say all of this as a offer of compassion and support for you, but also as a reminder, there are a number of things that we can do to manage our mental and emotional well-being. If we're dealing with a specific mental health crisis or illness or something significant, there are incredible resources, suicide hotlines and crisis lines, and places online, and places with our healthcare company and friends we can reach out to. If we're not in that sort of crisis mode, but it's okay to talk about things. It's okay to find help and therapy and coaching and talk to friends and ask for help and support. It's okay to cry. It's okay to scream. It's okay to just acknowledge, I'm not okay. Writing in our journals, going for walks, meditating, praying. There's so many different things that we can do, just breathing, to focus on our mental and emotional well-being. It's as important, if not more important, than our physical well-being, especially these days. So be kind and gentle to yourself. Be kind and gentle to everyone around you. People are carrying a lot these days. And if you need help, ask for help. There's so much help and support out there. There's so many resources. We are not in this thing alone. We're in it together. So thanks for joining me here on this live. I know this is kind of a heavy topic, but it feels really important for a number of reasons to me, and especially right now. All right, I'll talk to you again soon.